The novel The White Princess actually opens on the day of the Battle of Bosworth, and Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Elizabeth Woodville, the White Queen, is actually waiting to learn two completely key pieces of news. One is who has won the Battle of Bosworth and is going to be the next King of England, and it's hard to imagine anything more important to her than that, except the other question, which is who is therefore going to be her husband, because I believe that if Richard III had won at Bosworth, he would have married her. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that they were having a love affair and that she was hoping to marry him. But it's Henry VII, her betrothed, the betrothed stranger, who rides off the battlefield and sends for her, and she has to go to London and learn to be his wife. I think I wrote the non-fiction book, The Women of the Cousins' War, along with two other historians, David Baldwin and Michael Jones, because I really felt that people were coming to me and saying, as I always do, what's the fiction here, what's the history? And one of the things about writing a novel is that you're supposed to, it's the job, to combine these two strands in such a way that you don't pull them apart. But clearly readers always want, they enjoy the novel, but then they want to know what's true and what isn't. And so because these women are so little recorded and so little regarded, and because there's been until now so little interest in them, it just seemed really important to me that what I'd like to do would be to take an essay, that's no more than an essay on each woman, that had the facts of her life. So people who wanted to know more about them had a reference point that they could go to very easily. And I imagine I may do it for the subsequent three women of The Women of the Cousins' War as well, the fictional series. I did my doctorate in 18th century literature, and my first novels were set in the 18th century, which is a period that I find extraordinarily interesting, particularly because what happens to women in that period is very, very interesting. It is a time where women, in a sense, get peeled off from economic life. They become conspicuous consumers, they become ladies, they become gentrified, and the whole raft of things that a woman can and should do starts to become actually codified and taught and written down, so that you differentiate between a working woman and a lady of leisure. And women are really used by the elite 18th century to make it clear that they are not any longer in trade, or they're not any longer labouring men, or they're not any longer farmers. It's very, very interesting how that happens. So, of course, because I'm interested in women's history, the 18th century is very dear to my heart. But I was looking to write a novel about, I wanted to write a novel about piracy in the Tudor period, and I came across the name of this ship, the Mary Boleyn. And I was in a library, I was so lucky, I was in a library doing this research, and I went, I've never heard of Mary Boleyn. So I just, because I was in a library, just leaned over to a shelf, pulled a book off, looked her up, and she's in the footnotes, or she's in the, there's a one-line mention about her, what she's wearing at a dance. And I went, I had no idea that Anne Boleyn had a sister. And then I do a tiny bit more research, and it becomes apparent that she was Henry's lover, and that she probably had his son. And you go, a Boleyn Tudor boy? That's amazing. That's an amazing thing to have happened, and for no one to have observed it. And basically, Mary Boleyn had sat in the footnotes for 500 years, and no one had been very interested in her. And to me, it felt like a real discovery. So I wanted to write her story, and that really took me into the Tudors. And I got, as many people have before me, the Tudor bug. And there are such an interesting selection of characters, particularly women in that period, that have been very little covered, that it was irresistible. The next book I'm really excited about. It's harder to write in some ways because, again, she's a relatively unknown woman. She's Margaret, Countess of Salisbury. Her greatest claim to fame is that she is the oldest person Henry ever executed. She was a 68-year-old woman, clearly innocent of anything, any kind of major charge, and he executed her, I'm sure, because he was so angry with her for supporting Catherine of Aragon. Her execution is, in a way, a symptom of Henry Tudor's madness. I believe by then he is insane. But before then, she's a very, very great friend of Catherine of Aragon. She's governess to Princess Mary. And when the marriage dissolves, she stays on Catherine of Aragon's side, and she suffers very greatly for that, in that she then becomes Henry VIII's enemy. She's an extraordinary character. She's a very principled woman, and at the same time, she's a very, very determined entrepreneur. She puts together this enormous fortune, and she defends her name very, very strongly. family, and she is the daughter of George, Duke of Clarence, who was drowned in the Tower of London. So you've got this lovely connection between the Plantagenets and the Tudors in her life.